All right, you'll notice that I delayed the test to this week. And one of the reasons I did that is because as I saw worksheets come in, part of what I saw is that people had trouble with knowing what they were doing. And so I decided that this proves, and it's in part because this is one of the hardest things that we do this year. But it also means that if we're having trouble, then we need to ask questions, work through where to start, talk through these ideas together, and ask those questions so that we can start to get an understanding of what we're doing. So we're going to talk through a couple of other things together, but I'm also going to give you some time to check your work with me and ask some questions and try and, if you're confused on what to do, try and help with that. So please take advantage of that opportunity when we get time to work here. So I'm going to start with highlighting the directions here. With the given information, explain how the triangles are congruent using complete sentences. Complete sentences. This is the key part. If I just see you say angle, angle, side here and call it a day, then I'm not giving you credit for this assignment because that's not what you're supposed to do. Full and complete sentences. If it's angle, angle, side, I want to see that first angle explained. I want to see that second angle explained. I want to see that side explained and talk about why we're using angle, angle, side and not angle, side, angle. And I want you to use complete sentences to do it. I want you to write out an explanation of how this information tells you the sides and angles. So let's look at how that's going to work. We're going to do an example, and then I'm going to get you started on the homework. So, first bit of given information is this right here. And I talked about this last week, but this is why the vocab is so important, because you have to know what this symbol means, what it tells you, and how that's going to give us congruent sides and angles. That's the key part in all of this, is piecing that together. So the first thing you should know is what that symbol stands for. Well, that symbol stands for, we are given two pairs of sides that are perpendicular. That is what that symbol stands for. We're told that x to c is perpendicular to c to b, and ax is perpendicular to AD. So two pairs of sides that are perpendicular. We're going to say what they are. And then we're going to talk about what perpendicular can tell us. Because this doesn't give me a congruent angle yet. This just tells me they're perpendicular. I need to explain what that means and what that tells me. Well, perpendicular, again, you should know this from the vocab. This is what makes this difficult, is because a lot of different information is going to get all pieced together here. Perpendicular, here's XC and C to B, creates right angles. So as soon as you see perpendicular, you should be thinking right angles. And so I'm going to draw that out one more time. I have A to X and A to D. And so I have these two angles being right angles. Well, if they're both right angles, then they've got to be the same as each other. There's how I get congruent angles. So I went from perpendicular to saying they make right angles to saying that they're congruent. And that's from that understanding of perpendicular and what it means and what it tells you. Since perpendicular lines create right angles, this means that angle A and angle C so we're naming which angles they are in the diagram, are right angles. Making them congruent to each other. So that's our first pair of angles. We are also given that segments XB and XD are congruent, giving us a pair of sides. I don't need to explain anything there because they are marked as congruent already. So we have that pair of sides given to us already, so we can just mark it in the diagram and say that they're congruent. Boom. Another pair of sides down. So in these triangles, we usually need 3 pieces of information. So now that we have a pair of angles from the perpendicular lines, we got a pair of sides, we need one more thing. That's going to be from the diagram. That's going to be from the diagram. And the diagram is going to tell us these angles right here. We see in the diagram, we have these 2 angles across from each other, and we know those are vertical angles. In the diagram, we have a pair of vertical angles, BXC and AXD. And vertical angles must be congruent, giving us a pair of our second pair of angles. So now we have our 3 pieces of information. We've got 2 pairs of angles and a pair of sides. So we need to figure out which one we're going to use. Are we going to use angle, side, angle, or are we going to use angle, angle, side? Well, here's our 2 angles. And we want to know, is this side the side that's included between those angles? Well, the side that's included would be this side, but that's not what's marked. It's the one over here. So this is going to be angle, angle, side, since the side's not included. So we're going to explain that as well. Since our side is not included between the 2 angles, we can use angle, angle, side to prove that. And then we're going to write our congruence statement. Triangle BXC is congruent to triangle. Well, angle B up here should match up with angle D down here. So since B came first, then D came first. X is going to match up with X with those vertical angles, and C matches up with A. They're both right angles. So BXC and DXA are congruent. So in a larger proof, I want to kind of outline our steps that we're going to go to. The first thing we're going to look at is our given information. And from the given information, we're going to figure out how to get the sides and angles congruent. How does this information tell me those sides and angles? That's thing number one. Thing number two, after we're out of given information, so I've got my perpendicular lines giving us the angles, I've got my pairs of sides marked, the next place we're going to look is the diagram. Then once we have that, we should have our three pieces of information. So we're going to state out our side, 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 angle, side, etc. Whichever one we're using, we're going to say what it is and explain how, and then we're going to write a congruent statement. That's how kind of the outline of our explanation should look, which is the congruent statement is this. And so that's the outline of how these are going to look. I can't do every example and every single possibility and every single possible triangle. A lot of this is going to rely on you having to try these on your own. And so what I'm going to do on this homework assignment is that instead of giving you a piece of a whole proof to do, which you're eventually going to do on this assignment, your homework for today is just going to break down single steps. And so this is the other worksheet that you want to have out and get this for today. I'm going to start this first problem, and then I'm going to let you work on your own. So here we go. For each diagram, there's a pair of sides or angles that can be marked congruent. So instead of having to prove everything about all the triangles, we're just focusing on how do I take this one piece of information and write a sentence about it. I want to kind of break it down into smaller pieces. So 1 and 2, complete sentences. I still want complete sentences describing these sides or angles and the reason they can be marked congruent. So I'm going to do number 3 with you together. So we're using this diagram over here on the right, and the piece of information that we're given is that D is the midpoint of C to E. So that must mean that we're focusing in on D, on point D, and we're also focusing in on C to E, C out to E. So what we want to think about is, what does D being the midpoint of C to E tell us about this segment? That's what we want to explain. And our goal is to get to, therefore, these sides are congruent, or therefore, these angles are congruent. And so I want to give you a minute or two to try and write out this sentence. And if you want to type it out and send it to me, I can give you some feedback on how you're doing on these and whether you're on the right track, what things you want to be more specific about. So I want you to take a minute or two to try typing out this sentence and send it to me so that I can check your work here and see how you're doing on this. So this sentence is going to be shorter here because I'm only looking at 2 pieces of information here, or one single piece of information. So because D is the midpoint of segment CE, so we'd say, like, we're given this D as the midpoint. Well, what does the midpoint do? Well, the midpoint is the point in the middle of the segment. So what is it doing to C to E? Well, it's splitting C to E in half. It will split C to E into 2 equal pieces. That's what a midpoint is. So midpoint is going to split C to E cleanly in half so that we have C to D and D to E. And those 2 pieces are split in half. And those 2 pieces have to be the same. These 2 pieces segments C to D and D to E must be congruent, since they're the halves of the segment that we're splitting them into, which gives us a side. So if you're doing these right, then your kind of conclusion should be, now we have a pair of sides congruent, or now we have a pair of angles congruent. This is giving us a side. Sometimes it'll be as simple as the pair of sides are marked congruent. So like number 1 is going to be really short. Should be a pretty short sentence. If it says, remember I said a pair of angles that can be marked congruent either from the given information or from the diagram. So if you see no given information, it means that the thing you're looking for is from the diagram. So like on number 5, that means there's something in the diagram that we can mark congruent, and you need to pinpoint what those 2 are. Then I'm ramping it up a little bit on the back side and saying in these next problems, you'll be able to get 2 pairs of sides or angles congruent. So I'm giving you a piece of information that you'll be able to get a pair of sides or angles, and then you'll also have a piece of information in the diagram that you'll be able to get. So you should have 2 different sentences there. 2 different things that you're explaining. One is something that is off the given information. One is off of the diagram. So this is what I want you to work on for today. This is your homework assignment.